Hey team, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be showing you 4 examples of how to master the case statement in SQL. Before we deep dive into each case statement, here's a quick preview of each.
These previews are important because you get to see what I'm about to talk about. And for people that are subscribers and they already have listened to this video, sometimes you just need a little review to get it back in the game.
If you want to see more computer programming training videos from me, where each video is tailor-made for you, that are easy to follow, easy to understand, proven steps that will help you learn, then, you'd benefit from subscribing to my channel. I will not disappoint.
In this example, we are going to look at sales tax rate. You know what they say, the tax man always cometh. So I'm going to connect to AdventureWorks, and then we're going to look at the top 20 rows. And as you look at these right here, you'll notice that this one column, TaxType, is numeric. And I don't know what that means, do you? But we can write a SQL statement with the case statement to actually make that make sense. So I went out to the internet and I looked up data dictionary for AdventureWorks, and I found that TaxType has 3 options. And the first one means that retail only, 2 is wholesale only, and 3 is retail and wholesale transactions. So let's take a distinct look at our tax types. Notice 1, 2, 3, so that data dictionary is up to date. The second thing I wasn't sure about is when I was joining this table, notice I had one other column there called State Province ID, and there were just numerics. It'd be nice to put a name with that. So what we'll do is we will go out and join that with another table so we can get some more descriptive information. So here is the example. And the example is first executed. And notice here, once it's executed, it comes out and picks the country code, the state name, the tax type description, and the tax rate. Now notice tax type description is my case statement. So the way a case statement works is, notice it says case and end, and then this as with the column name is the name of my column. That's an output column name. And you already know that the as is optional, and we'll re-execute to prove. So case end, you've got that. Now let's look at this one clause. Well, it's saying when that tax, I made an alias here on sales tax rate, tax.taxType equals 1, then set it to that term. And when it's 2, set it to wholesaler. And when it's 3, set it to retail and wholesale. And notice that's going to go into the column tax type description. Let's look at this output one more time. And there you have it, example 1. In this example, we are going to be looking at the production.product table. And let's do our first query to go see what kind of data we have available. Notice the column of interest here is this one called make flag. So let's go up there and get a distinct types of that. So how would we do that? We would say select distinct make flag. And we can do that from here. Control C that, Control V, and let's execute that. So notice we have a 0 or a 1. Now this data type is of type bit. So 0 means the product is actually purchased and we resell it. And 1 is the product is manufactured in-house. So you can imagine that, right? So what I'd like to do is I would like to use a case statement and do an aggregate function. And what it's going to do is it's going to average the cost of the list price minus the standard cost when make flag is 0. So forget about this right now. And remember video example 1. It was just a simple case statement. It was the case and then an end, and then some kind of column name. And then we looked at the when, and the when identifies a column. And I'm saying case when flag is 0. Well, what do you want me to do when the flag is 0? Well, what I want you to do is I want you to take the list price minus the standard cost, and I want you to assign it to product is purchased 0. Well, 0 is product purchased. And the beautiful thing about this next is we have an aggregate function that wraps this, and it will do the average. Now on the second case statement, forget about this average, it's a simple case statement. And it's when make flag is 1, I'm going to do that same subtraction. And then I'm going to assign it to manufactured in-house of type 1, this guy. Now you see that this aggregate function wraps from that open all the way down to the close. So it's going to keep using this as my input. And let's see what happens when we execute this. Notice it knocked me out 2 columns, and it showed me, now remember we're trying to get the average. So the average profit, the list price minus the standard cost for products is purchased is, like almost $8. But when they manufacture it in-house, their profit is $370. Now, a lot of times we need trust when we do SQL statements, especially before we do this. Programmers call this unit testing. So before you give this to the boss or even a colleague, check your work. Make sure your math or whatever is done correctly. So let me show you how I did it. The first thing I did is I said, select the sum of the list price minus the standard cost. And I'm putting that into profit. And then I compute the count. And let's just see what happens here. Notice that comes out and tells me my profit is 88,000. And it looks like we have 239 items were there. Now what I did is this is, notice, a subquery. A subquery like from and then this subquery. And notice that we're using these items. So when I execute this, notice that my average is $370. Do you remember when I did the statement above it? It was $370. 370,9024. So I can trust that this SQL statement is legit, right? Excellent. Now we're going to do a little bit different, and look at it. We're going to do a group by. So this right here is our subquery, and we're just rolling it up. So here, when make flag is 0, it's 794, and 1 is 370. So there's always 100 different ways to do SQL to solve a problem, but you see this right here is pretty elegant, and that is the second video. Let us take a look at the third example. Notice that I'm using the case statement up against the where clause. Now this is different from the previous two. I used them in this section. Notice I'm saying this case end, remember we learned that in the first video, and then the when clause. It's saying like if the product ID is null. Notice up here it says is null. Declare product ID int as null. This is the value. So this is saying when that value is null, I want you to use the product ID from the table. Now let's see what that would look like if I even did that as a SQL statement. I would say pi.productID, and then of course because I'm doing aggregate functions I'd have to say group by. And notice when I execute this, I go get all the data. Do you see that? I go get it all. 432 rows. And that is because when product ID is null, I used this column, the column from the table. Now, when this is not null, like I come up here and put a value like 318, and this is saying when product ID is null, no. So this is the true condition. And then this one is the false condition. So I would use this. So all I would do is replace this with 318 and re-execute that select statement. And notice I just got one row. So you see how this whole case statement evaluates to either giving me one value or giving them all to me, pi.productType. So that's what the case statement does. Excellent. Now look at this change down here. What we've done is we're going to do this same SQL statement just another way. And that's the way programming is in the real world. 100 ways to do every problem. Notice here I'm declaring a variable. My product ID is an integer. I'm going to put 323 into that value. Notice that I'm doing two columns. I'm doing an aggregate function, so I have to do the group by. And now, where the product ID is null. So if this value is null, then use the product from the table. If it's not, then just use this value. So is null. Is this null? No. So I'm going to use this value. If this is null, I'm going to use it from the table. So let's take a look at that. How many rows would we get on this execution? One or all of them? One. Very good. Now if we come over here and say product ID is null, then this right here, is that null? Then I want you to use the product from the table, and this would go get them all. And let us look at the last example. Notice here we're saying select, and then we have just basic columns. I'm going to cast the end date as a date. This is date time, but I just need the date of them. And then we have a case statement. Now these case statements are just like we've learned in the previous three, where it starts with the word case. This is my output field name. And then I'm saying when the end date is greater than the due date. Now when the end date is greater than the due date, then I consider that late. When the end date is greater than the due date. So now if that is not true, then they're on time. So this is like some if condition, the true and the false. Now, regardless if it's late or on time, that's going to go into the field called MSG, message. I have my case statement. My output field is days apart, and I'm saying when the end date is greater than the due date, just like the statement above. But notice here, if it's true, I'm going to use the date diff function for the day, and I'm going to take it from due date to end date. Now, if that is not true, I'm going to come and do it from the end date to the due date. Notice that I swapped the dates. Isn't that beautiful? Let's see how this works out. And here's the output. So notice here, it's saying that this is 1 day apart. Notice this is on the January the 12th, and this is January the 11th. This late. It's 1 day apart. And all the data that is associated with that. And those are just, you're late. That's not good, right? Okay, excellent. Now, let's kick this kind of statement up a notch, and let's put it into a table. So I said declare at table as table. And then I'm saying this table has 5 columns. And then the output of this select statement is the input to this insert statement. And this is a temporary table that I'm building in source code. And then when that's all said and done, I can come down here and say, select star from at table where MSG equals late. Only get the late ones. How about we do one more? And days apart is less than 5. And there you have it.
Thanks for hanging in there, team. I hope you are walking away with a nugget or two. I would appreciate it if you could leave a comment, and if this is good enough for you to recommend to others, please leave a thumbs up. And lastly, if you want to see more of these types of videos from me, please consider subscribing.